The first time I saw her, my mind analyzed her smooth, skinny, elegant body out of interest. The first time I heard her voice, my heart raced with fear and excitement. The first time I heard her sing, my soul fell in love. The first time we met was in the Blue Oyster Bar just off of South State Street to see a few familiar faces after a hard day's work at the woodsmith's woodworking carpenter shop. The manager of the club had announced a new singer that was to be performing that night, Celia Beeks. She sang in a way that seemed to take the sound away from your ears. She made me feel like I was a part of her voice echoing so smoothly through the club. I couldn't bear to take my eyes off her throughout the entirety of her first song. And after she had finished her performance, she gave me an interested and wondrous look. She walked around the back of the stage and joined me at the bar. I offered to buy her a drink, and she pleasantly accepted. We talked late into the night and grew very close to one another. About a month into Celia's career, I read a story in the Chicago Times with the headline reading, "The Most Beautiful Voice You Will Ever Hear," with the subtitle reading, "Come on down to the Blue Oyster if you want to hear a real songbird's melody." After that, I started calling Celia a beautiful songbird because of her reputation for singing so beautifully. Every night for 2 months, we would meet together and talk and laugh for as long as we dared. Until one night, I offered to drive her home. We seemed to be having a very lovely and complicated conversation that we didn't want to have ended. Before she left the car, however, I had gathered the courage to confess my love for Celia and asked her, "Will you, Celia Beeks, my beautiful songbird, will you marry me?" And she said yes. We got married in Grace Chicago Church in July of 1967. 1 month after our wedding, Celia received an invitation to sing on Broadway in New York City, along with a pretty salary that would set us up for life. On the night we had received the invitation, me and my wife went out to celebrate and visited the Blue Oyster one last time before flying out to the Big Apple in the morning. But tragically, my wife was killed right before me that very same night when a gunman pulled into the bar and shot my wife right through the heart, right through my beautiful songbird's heart. I watched as the life faded from her eyes. I held Celia in my arms as her body went limp, collapsing to the ground. I was filled with loss and rage. I charged the gunman and knocked him to the ground, but not before he shot and killed 3 more victims of his crime. I disarmed the gunman that night and nearly beat him to death. When the police arrived, I was still hitting the gunman, shouting and cursing. After I had explained to them what had happened, they said no charges would be pressed against me because my actions counted as self-defense, despite the fact that the shooter had been hospitalized and didn't live through the night. I was the only one to attend Celia's funeral. My parents insisted they were too busy. Celia's father was a drunk, her mother was dead, and her sister was too far out of town to make it in time for the ceremony. Celia had written me a letter in her will stating how much she loved me and that she had made arrangements to reserve a portion of her money to buy me a songbird, so that I would never truly lose her, she said. 2 days after her passing, a delivery man arrived with the songbird. "Are you Fred Beeks?" the man asked. "Yes," I replied. "I have a delivery for you." The man handed me a cage covered by a thin cloth. "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said. I set the cage down and removed the cloth. Underneath chirped a small red songbird. The bird seemed shy and chirped prettily, but low. "Celia," I thought. "I'll call you Celia. My beautiful songbird has returned to me." Days, weeks, months passed. Eventually, I lost my job, my friends, and all desire to live. Every day I sat in front of the television amused by the news, which focused on crime stories, shootings in particular. All through the day and all through the night, I would see blood, death, and hear commentary on such matters. I had no urge to eat. I barely slept, but I developed a habit of drinking. The longer I had stayed locked up in the bottle I had crawled into, while watching others die by the names of Sandra Mole, Harry Leopard, Mira Olins, Jerry Pisher, and so on, the more vexing the songbird became. My apartment was very small and condensed, so every time the bird chirped, or especially every time it would squawk, it would echo throughout the halls. The more persistent the noise became, the more transparent it became. It became so clear to me I could hear it echoing in my head, ringing in my ears, hurting them. No matter what I did, I could not escape the noise. I could probably bury that bird in the deepest, darkest hole in the earth and still hear it, I thought to myself. It had gotten to the point where even if I locked it away in the farthest room from me, I could hear the chirps as clearly as if the damn feathered thing was sitting on my shoulder chirping on and on into my ear. And it hurt. My God, it hurt. Every time it chirped, my eardrums would pulse with immense pressure. What could it desire, I asked myself. More food, more water, more comfort? I already offer her those things. Aside from the news, the bird gets my undivided attention, more so now than ever. Does she seek to drive me mad? Does she hope to chirp me deaf? Will she be my doom? The answers to these questions I cannot wait for. I must put the noise to rest. I stormed into the room I had locked the bird in at the opposite end of the apartment. I lifted the cage door open and reached in for the bird. She flapped her wings rapidly and dodged past my hand, squawking loudly. She hovered this way and that, high above me, close to the ceiling. I grabbed a cane out of the corner of the room and swung it this way and that at the bird. I hit one of the bird's wings, and it fell to the ground, chirping weakly. I rushed up to the bird and snapped its head clean off. My beautiful songbird, I thought. She's still beautiful. The following morning, 2 policemen knocked on my door, said they had reported complaints from nearby residents stating they heard horrendous screams the night before. I assured the good officers that there was nothing to be concerned about, though I did admit that a bird had been chirping loudly. Nah, the neighbors said they heard screams. Is your wife in, Mr. Beeks? My wife is deceased, I said. The officer looked down and apologized sympathetically. All the same, would you mind if we came in, just to see if everything's all right? The second officer asked, who was a female. Not at all, I said while opening my door more widely. At first I had been talking to the officers with the door cracked, but when I opened it even more so, and they saw my clothes, the officers looked horrified by the sight of them. I wasn't quite sure why the officers had the facial expressions they did. I looked down at my clothes. I couldn't recall the last time I had done so. My clothes were old, they stank, and were covered in dry blood. Suddenly something came over me, an instinct, a reaction. I had almost no control over it. I ran to the kitchen, unsure as to why. I was scared of what was going on and blank-minded on what I should do. The officers raced after me. I grabbed a large, sharp kitchen knife, turned around, and stabbed the officer repeatedly in the chest. I was horrified by my actions. Part of me was shouting, "Stop! Stop! Stop! Why am I doing this?" But a more conscious part of me felt it was necessary and seemed to have an odd, calm comfort with the actions of my body. I looked up at the female officer. She was rushing toward me. I dropped my knife and grabbed the dead officer's pistol. I aimed it and shot her in the heart. When I aimed the gun, I seemed to be so sure and confident of myself. When I fired the weapon, the bullet seemed to be so precise and specific as to where it hit the officer. I stood and looked at the scenery of what had happened, the lifeless looks in the officer's eyes. I know that look, I thought to myself. I've seen it many times before. I remember now. I remember what happened that never really happened before. I remember the funeral I attended so many months ago. It wasn't Celia's. It was the shooter's. And the man who delivered the bird to me, he wasn't a delivery man. He was a doctor returning my wife home from the hospital. Celia hadn't been shot through the heart. She had been shot through her cheeks. She was missing 9 teeth, and the holes on either side of her cheeks were still large when she had returned. My beautiful songbird was no longer beautiful. She was horrible to look upon and unable to sing as elegantly as she once did. I remember the victims on the news, the murder cases. It was all the same story being reported on, yes. In every image captured of the victims, the men were beaten to death, and the women had holes in their hearts and their cheeks. I Yes, I killed them. And the songbird. What commotion did I cause to lure the police into my apartment this morning? I thought to myself. Is it not obvious? A voice in my head asked. There never was a songbird chirping in your apartment, Frederick. There was only your beautiful songbird. The end.